WDEL Aware. Here's Peter MacArthur.
Well, at least this time it was expected, but not good. Another 3 million people filing for unemployment claims last week. It's about 33 million now. The number of people that have lost their jobs since this pandemic reared its ugly head. Let's talk about jobs, job searches, where to turn next. And we have a great resource here to do that. Chris Burkhard, president of Placer Staffing. You know that they've been in business in Delaware since the early 70s, helping thousands of us find jobs over the course of that time. Chris, thanks so much for taking some time this morning. Appreciate it.
Pete, thanks for having me on this morning.
Maybe what we start with is kind of a general statement, Chris, on if I am unemployed right now and wondering where to turn next, what are some of the things you would tell people to kind of keep in mind about the need for a job in an environment like this?
I think it's the right question. I think this is it's a time of a lot of uncertainty for businesses. So businesses are thinking about the roles that they had pre-COVID and determining if they're appropriate to their business and their business models post-COVID. So I think folks should be considering that this might be a time, if they were already going to maybe have 10 or 13 different jobs during their lifetime, but this might be a time where they need to pivot or retool and maybe consider a new field or industry. I think this is a great time for people to do some of the basics that, people think about, getting your resume together, thinking about your accomplishments, maybe working with someone else to help you with that. Although you can't network in person, perhaps this is video has replaced that in-person coffee clutch. I have found, Pete, that it's never been easier to pick up the phone and talk to the person that you want to talk to at any level. People have the time in lockdown.
That's a great point, actually. And you also brought up another good point that experts I've heard on all levels saying, even if you're collecting unemployment now, even if you think you view this as a temporary situation with your job, do not stop looking for another position while this is playing out.
Well, I think, you might think that your job search time might be extended, but this is a time where if you're blessed to maybe if a business is deemed essential, folks are busy and there are jobs. And then there are, of course, pockets where it's not essential and those businesses are slowly going to turn on. Pete, one thing I might suggest people consider, and it's not always commonplace to think this way, about 40% of all roles are really working for a third party. They could be freelance, they could be independent contractor, temporary. And I find that most people are much better at doing their day job than they are in conducting their job search. And, I represent the staffing industry well beyond placers. I think it's a terrific way for people to try before they buy, get a look behind the door and perhaps in an industry or job that they might not have access to on their own, and then really work with a broker to help them broker their skills.
And so by getting that look behind the scenes, you can see whether you think it might be a good fit.
Well, everything feels kind of temporary right now as we launch. And I think there is still plenty of good work to do in Delaware businesses. I simply think there isn't a lot of clarity as to how this is going to, is it going to be a straight line back, or is it going to have stops and starts? So, that kind of, most work is a project, and contracts and temporary work is a great way to get that look behind the door, if you will.
It's an interesting time, too. People in crisis, maybe they came from a spot where their jobs used to have an important title that went along with it, and now they realize 7-8 weeks into this situation, my savings isn't what it used to be. I have a family here. Talk about people having the need, perhaps, to refocus into maybe it's a lesser capacity, maybe it's a lesser paying job or a job that is not of the prestige of the one you had. The reality check here is that at some point you need to bring back a paycheck again.
I think that you're right, and you can do that. I think thinking in terms of getting back to work versus your long-term career may help that, for 90 days or 6 months, I can do what I need to do to put food on the table. There is this general thought that assets are on sale. Businesses are cheaper, everything's down, and that translates maybe into wages. But I'm not so sure that's across the board. But this is a very interesting migration of labor. This is a time where frontline workers are obviously in great demand and being recognized for their sacrifice. And it's an odd time where a professional or a leader may not be as valued in their job search. And so it's a very interesting kind of shift in mindset of importance. And that might just be timing. I think businesses are trying to get a service out the door, a product out the door. And I'm finding that the strategy of growth or of, doing new things in the business have simply just been delayed. So it's a bit of, with less demand, simply trying to get product out the door, service out the door, and a lot of other plans that impact many jobs and job classes have simply been maybe pushed to later in the year.
If you're just joining us, I'm Peter MacArthur. This is Del Aware, talking with Chris Burkhard, president of Placers Staffing. Another theory I heard the other day, Chris, is pretty interesting about how this might change what's looked at as a desirable place to work. That perhaps now remote work is like huge to a lot of people, or if a company stresses cleanliness and safety, these are now words that catch people's attention because they're scared about going to certain places that don't stress that stuff.
Pete, it's a great point, and I think what you're talking about is one word, and that's trust.
Yeah.
And how can all of us as leaders, as businesses, build trust in the workforce and the workplace? And it's not an easy question, and I propose that the workers themselves need to help us define that and roll up their sleeves and perhaps be entrepreneurial and help us define that. There is not a playbook for coming back to work from a pandemic. And, I see the government and I see businesses, and I'm in trade groups that we're all working to put together the best plan. But this is new. And I think it's going to take all of us to work together, and people need to speak up and get involved, and businesses need to allow that involvement. But it's hard to build that trust when people have fear. But that's what I think all of us are attempting to do.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, fear can do a couple of things to people. It can cause focus in some. It can cause confusion in others. And that leads me to, if people are thinking about perhaps using a professional service, a recruiter, to help them find the next position, what feasibly can a recruiter do for them at this stage of the game, do you think?
Well, I think a good recruiter has a lot of skills and experiences, but one of the primary things is they work for a business that has connections and contracts into the local market. So, if you work in manufacturing, if you're an accountant, you've probably been busy at your career for some time, but if you work with the right recruiter, they will have that network and relationships with others that could help you define maybe where you might like to work. They also are going to be an expert in all things careers, helping you with all parts of your job search, helping you with leads, perhaps, helping you get prepared for interviews if you have that sort of thing. But they'll have the skills to help you sort of polish up the parts of the job search that, most people don't do a job search every year. You got to get back into that game.
Moving forward, Chris, do you think that your business will have a different approach as a result of this? We talked about workplaces and some of the changes they might incorporate. Is the foundation of what you do solid, and will that kind of just stay the same? Is it important to keep it the same approach?
So I'm blessed to have survived the last recession, and that helped me look at Placer strategy quite a bit and make sure that we were a lot more recession-proof and working with businesses and organizations that are essential and have long-term strategies. The biggest shift we have made is, we tried to figure out what we could do, Pete. Lots of people are trying to help, and we all feel better when we do good. We've put together a plan that we call the Placers Act of Kindness Plan, where we're simply giving away all career coaching, all help with resumes, leads, even if we don't have a connection with that Delaware area business, and in some cases helping people with temporary work to help them transition, as we said, for 90 days or so. So that's what we're doing. What I have seen is, because of the uncertainty in the marketplace, there are growing lists of ideas on how people will come back to work. It's all over the board, and none of it is set. But one thing is organizations will continue to use a contingent or contract workforce because of uncertainty. And that's good for all of us, and it will certainly help people get back to work more quickly.
All right. If people want to check out the situation you just mentioned with what your company's doing to help folks out, should they go to the website? How do they find out more information?
Just go to the web. All I have to do is put in Placer's Act of Kindness, and there's a simple form, and it goes directly to a recruiter, and they'll get a call today.